Jesus was born a virgin?
As I said before, there are elements of the text that I don't feel qualified to comment on. My experience has been that the more, I know from a metaphorical perspective and from a mythic perspective what the story of the virgin birth means, and I accept that. I know, for example, that any culture that doesn't hold the image of the woman and infant sacred dies. And I don't know how that needs to be expressed in a form.
Is it true, though?
Do you mean that you don't know?
Well,
it's a moral question, and
I know that's exactly.
And I was dealing with a factual question, which is, did Jesus have a father? And you won't answer it.
You made a statement a couple of months ago that I found very interesting, and I don't claim to understand it, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot with it. You said that you were a cultural Christian. Okay, and so that raised a number of questions in my mind. And the first question was,
you are changing the subject.
No, I'm not. No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I may be leaping outside of the topic a bit to get back to it.
We can do cultural Christianity, but I think, because I have a list of questions that you wanted to ask, and that is one of them. But I think Professor Dawkins did ask you...
You were referring to the predictive power and to the utility of the stories.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's actually what I was trying to zero in on.
Go ahead.
Okay, so that was the point. Well, it seemed to me that your proclamation that you were a cultural Christian was a recognition and a statement that you had found something in the culture that had been derived from Christianity that you had an affinity with, and that there's some reason for that. And one of the things I wanted to ask you is, well, what do you think that Christianity got right that allows you to make a statement like that? I mean, I know that there's differences perhaps in what we both think about the ultimate veracity of the biblical stories. Maybe there isn't differences. It would take a lot of conversation to figure this out. But what did you mean by that? What do you think that Christianity got right that would enable you to make a statement like that?
Virtually nothing. I meant by that no more than that I'm brought up in a Christian culture. I went to Christian schools. I therefore know my way around the Bible. I know my way around the Book of Common Prayer. I know the hymns. That's all. I don't value Christianity as a truth system at all.
Okay, so let me ask you about that, because maybe that's true and perhaps it's not. So the first question is, do you think that there are any marked differences between cultural traditions that would enable you to rank order them in terms of their ethical validity?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so for example, we could contrast mainstream UK Christianity with Islamic fundamentalism.
Yes.
Okay, so there's a hierarchy.
There is a hierarchy.
Okay, a hierarchy that points to what?
Well, in the case of Islam, I dislike any religion which punishes apostasy with death, that throws gay people off high buildings, that practices clitoridectomy. That seems to me to place Islam on a lower level than Christianity, but that's not to say anything very positive about Christianity.
Well, it might be to say something positive about Christianity. I think that question is open, because you might ask yourself, what did Christianity get right that led it away from those particular presumptions and towards something that you regard as more ethically appropriate? This isn't a trivial question.
It's a very modest claim. There's not very much. I mean, to be better than a religion that throws gay people off high buildings is not really a very virtuous achievement.
I don't know. I don't know if that's true, because if you look at the barbarism that characterizes the human past, you might think that any progression whatsoever towards something approximating mercy and tolerance is nothing short of a bloody miracle.
Well,
people are pretty ruthless, and so are our chimpanzee cousins.
Yes, they are.
Right. So we move forward into the light with great difficulty. And the fact that we can take that for granted now, and that it seems self-evident and deserving of faint praise, it's not so clear to me that that's a reasonable proposition.
Okay, let's grant the faint praise, but that has nothing to do with the truth value. And what I care about is the truth value. I see no truth value in the claims of Christianity, the virgin birth, the resurrection, the miracles. Do you believe in any of those? Do you believe Jesus was born a virgin?
As I said before, there are elements of the text that I don't feel qualified to comment on. My experience has been that the more, I know from a metaphorical perspective and from a mythic perspective what the story of the virgin birth means, and I accept that. I know, for example, that any culture that doesn't hold the image of the woman and infant sacred dies.
Do you mean
and I don't know how that needs to be expressed in a form.
True, though?
Do you mean that you don't know?
Well,
Dawkins is making an evidence-based argument. Christianity as a belief system doesn't hold up to scrutiny. There's no empirical evidence for the virgin birth, resurrection, or miracles. None of these claims meet the standards of historical verification. For example, Bart Ehrman, a respected New Testament scholar, points out that the Gospels were written decades after Jesus' death by anonymous authors, full of contradictions and theological bias. That's not reliable evidence, it's religious tradition. When Peterson talks about holding the mother and child sacred, he shifts to metaphor. But metaphors don't prove anything. They might feel meaningful, but they're not evidence for a god, a virgin birth, or divinity. Dawkins stays focused on truth. Peterson avoids the question entirely. When Dawkins is asked something, he gives a clear answer. When Peterson is asked, he deflects. That's why Dawkins calls it out. Maybe Peterson doesn't actually believe these things and doesn't want to admit it. And the idea that Christianity led us toward mercy and tolerance? History doesn't support that. The Inquisition, witch trials, slavery justified by Scripture, and opposition to women's rights and science all came from dominant Christian cultures. Progress came in spite of religion, not because of it. Led by secular thinkers like Voltaire, Thomas Paine, Bertrand Russell, and modern human rights advocates. Dawkins is right to say, cultural familiarity doesn't mean truth, and religious comfort doesn't equal evidence. Let's continue watching.
Let me ask you about that, because truth, this is something I talked with Sam Harris about too. Truth, as we know, is a tricky business. Do you think there are differences in the truth claims between different writers of fiction? Like, is Dostoevsky more profound than...
No, well, I wouldn't call fiction truth claims anyway. I mean, these are...
Then on what grounds do we rank order the fiction in terms of quality? Like, Dostoevsky is a profound purveyor of fiction on the philosophical front, unbelievably deep and profound.
Yes,
There's something true about what he's writing about.
It's nothing to do with the truth that science is concerned with. The truth of science is the truth that gets us to the moon. I mean, this is nothing to do with whether one writer of fiction has a sort of insight into human nature. That goes without saying. I accept that.
Okay, so how do we deal with the notion that on the purely factual side, how do we deal with the idea, let's take you talked about clitoridectomy, let's talk about the oppression of women.
Yes.
We make a scientific case that that's inappropriate? Or is it a case that we're making on some other grounds? Like I see in the Judeo-Christian tradition, one of the earliest pronouncements is that both men and women carry the image of God, both. And that sets a certain tone to everything that follows. And it is a remarkable proclamation given its radical age, that both men and women carry the image of God and are to be treated as something with intrinsic value outside of the domain of power and politics. And it isn't obvious to me, having thought about this a lot, how we deal with that in the pure realm of fact. Because one of the facts is, if I can oppress you, why the hell shouldn't I?
Yeah, my job is to keep things on track here. I think there are a number of questions which Professor Dawkins has asked quite directly that we still haven't really heard an answer for.
Okay.
When Professor Dawkins asking about the virgin birth, you started talking about metaphor, you started talking about myth. I think anybody listening to this conversation will understand that maybe a society that doesn't believe in the virgin birth won't work. Maybe that's the predictive power that you're talking about. But I think you must understand that when Professor Dawkins is asking you, do you believe that Jesus was born of a virgin? He means something like a biological fact. And by the way, saying I don't know, or saying, I'm not qualified to comment, is an answer to that question, but is that your answer, that you don't know? I
said earlier, and I would hold to this, is that there are elements of the text that I don't know how to, that I'm incapable of fully accounting for. I can't account for what the fundamental reality and significance of the notion of the resurrection is. My knowledge just ends.
Sure, but
I know that whatever happened whatever happened as a consequence of the origination and the promotion of the Christian story was powerful enough to bring Rome to its knees and demolish the pagan enterprise. So there's some power in that story that's remarkable.
Let's stick to the virgin birth.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, well, the virgin birth results from a mistranslation of Isaiah. You know that.
Like these sorts of questions, what would you say? They don't strike me as, they're not getting to the point.
I know
the
that. I
story
know
has
you
a
think
purpose.
that. Yes.
Well, and look, I understand that there's perfect reasons to debate this. I know that, and I know that your question is more than valid, but it's beside the issue as far as I'm concerned, and it's partly because, well, when we started this conversation, I said, for example, that it appears to be the case that a description of the structure through which we see the world is a story. We see the world through a story. And so that's a remarkable thing. That's a remarkable discovery, and it's emerged probably in the last 60 years in multiple disciplines, because we have to prioritize our facts. And so we prioritize them according to a particular pattern. And there are patterns that seem to work and to propagate themselves properly and to orient cultures towards life abundant. And there are other patterns, the pattern of Cain, for example, that lead to absolute bloody devastation. And I don't know exactly how to construe that sort of truth. But we talked about the oppression of women, for example. It's like, how do you make a case on purely factual grounds that women should be treated as equals?
It's a moral question, and
I know that's exactly.
And I was dealing with a factual question, which is, did Jesus have a father? And you won't answer it.
Well,
It's a
Jesus
different
had an
kind of
earthly
question.
father and a heavenly father, like almost all mythological heroes.
So he wasn't born of a virgin then? So you're saying that Jesus was not born of a virgin?
I said, first of all, that I don't know how to mediate the fact-value dichotomy in that case. I said the same thing about the resurrection.
It's not a value. It's a simple fact. I mean, did a man have intercourse with Mary and produce Jesus? That's a factual question.
Dawkins asked a simple question. Was Jesus born of a virgin? Peterson danced around it for minutes without answering. That's exactly the problem Dawkins is pointing out. If the core claims of Christianity can't be answered as facts, they collapse under basic scrutiny. The virgin birth isn't just unverified, it's based on a mistranslation. The original Hebrew word in Isaiah 7:14 is alma, which means young woman, not virgin. The Greek Septuagint mistranslated it as parthenos, meaning virgin, and that error made its way into the Gospels. Scholars like Bart Ehrman and Geza Vermes confirm this. It's not controversial, it's academic consensus. Peterson tries to say these stories are powerful because they moved culture, but power doesn't prove truth. Islam, communism, and Nazi ideology also moved millions. That doesn't make them true. He also claims Christianity elevated women. But the Bible repeatedly treats women as property. Exodus 21, Deuteronomy 22, and even Paul's letters instruct women to submit. The real progress for women came through secular law, civil rights movements, and feminist philosophy, not scripture. And when Dawkins asks again, did Jesus have a human father? Peterson still won't say. That's why Dawkins is right. If the answers don't hold up when plainly asked, then the claims don't deserve to be treated as truth. Let's keep watching.
It's not a value question.
You must understand what you're being asked here, that even if you think that, say, the author of the biblical texts intended much more significance than a simple scientific analysis of events, Professor Dawkins is interested in scientific truth. That's the kind of truth that he's interested in. And even if you think it's irrelevant to the point of what the gospel authors were getting at, that first needs to be clarified before you can then begin actually uncovering what the stories are about. So I think Professor Dawkins is asking from a scientific perspective, and maybe you think that scientific approach is wrong, but if you just take it for a moment, maybe this is how we find out that it is wrong. Let's take a scientific approach, ask the question, did this occur?
I think that it's inappropriate to use a question like that to attempt to undermine the validity of the entire, what would you say, deep mythological enterprise.
Well, suppose we weren't doing that. Suppose we were asking out of interest. Suppose that we were all here devout Christians, maybe even Jungian Christians, and we thought, this is interesting, over dinner. Do you think it really happened, like scientifically? Would your answer just be, I don't know?
Yes.
And you wouldn't consider it, I mean, it's not an inappropriate question to ask, just on a point of interest.
Right.
Did this really occur? And I think so often people are asking you that, and especially given the context of this conversation, we've heard everything that you're saying about metaphor and myth, but because the question is still then being asked, did it really happen? You know that that's what you're being asked. And the way you just so easily said yes, I wonder why you struggle to do that in so many other circumstances.
I think because I don't look at the situation the same. The way that Dr. Dawkins and I look at the situation are really quite different, and at many, many, many levels. You know, so even on the meme question, for example, you know, like, I know the literature on the history of religious ideas. I see how these ideas have battled across millennia in a manner that is very reminiscent to me of the same sort of claim that Dr. Dawkins is putting forward with regards to meme. I know that literature. Dr. Dawkins doesn't know that literature. And it's very difficult for me to communicate from within the confines of that literature because it's extensive and deep. And we're dealing with things that we don't understand the relationship between metaphoric truth and value predicated truth and factual truth. We don't understand that. It's a big problem. There's no evidence whatsoever from the scientific perspective that we can orient ourselves in the world merely in consequence of the facts.
Sure.
And that's a fact. And it's a fact that's been detailed out in great detail in the last 60 years by people from a variety of different disciplines. We have to prioritize the facts. That's a value hierarchy. There may be true and false ways of prioritizing facts, but you can't determine the truth or falsehood of the way that you prioritize facts by making reference to the facts. That's a big problem.
Okay, let's talk about that as perhaps a slight detour here, because I think we do need to come back to this Christ resurrection thing. But Professor Dawkins, would you say that underlying the scientific enterprise is a fundamentally unscientific assumption? You can make scientific investigations in the world, but in order to do so, you need to choose what to prioritize. You need to choose what to investigate. You also need to value the truth. You need to have a value and a motivation for doing it in the first place. Those kinds of things cannot themselves be scientifically justified. And so does the scientific enterprise have an unscientific assumption of the space?
I suppose it does. I mean, I think that maybe just be Jordan and Richard, by the way. I think that Jordan prioritizes myth and I prioritize fact. And I think myth is kind of vaguely interesting, but it's not the be-all and end-all of my life. I think it's somewhat secondary to scientific fact, the sort of facts that tell us how old the universe is, how old the world is, the history of life, the engineering achievements of landing a spacecraft on a comet. These are the things that science can do. And as I said, the predictions of quantum theory, to come back to that, the predictions of quantum theory, which are verified to a sufficient number of decimal places that it's equivalent to predicting the width of North America to one hair's breadth. Now, that is, however difficult quantum theory is to understand, that is what you can get from quantum theory. Now, the mysteries of the Bible, if they are mysteries, aren't in the same league. I mean, they just don't cut it.
Peterson keeps dodging a basic question. Did the virgin birth or resurrection happen as a fact? He talks about myth, metaphor, and the power of stories, but that's not the issue. Dawkins is asking for evidence, not symbolism. Peterson claims truth can't just be about facts, but that's not how we build reliable knowledge. Science is based on observation, testing, and replication, and it works. We can date the Earth to 4.54 billion years with radiometric dating. We can trace the evolution of life through fossils and DNA. And we can land probes on comets using quantum calculations accurate to fractions of a nanometer. That's truth we can build on. Compare that to the Bible. No evidence for a global flood, no external confirmation of the Exodus, and no verifiable proof of a virgin birth or resurrection. These aren't mysteries. They're claims made without evidence. Peterson wants to treat myth as equal to science, but stories are not substitutes for facts. And when Peterson says Dawkins doesn't understand religious literature, that doesn't change the problem. Truth claims require evidence, not familiarity with ancient texts. Dawkins is right. Prioritizing facts over comforting myths is how we make progress. What do you think? Should society lean on ancient stories, or should we demand truth backed by real evidence?
Let's take the moral thing first. Islam is a nasty religion. I think we agree about that. But Christianity is not all that nice either. And when you think about Christianity, Christianity is obsessed with sin. St. Augustine said that we all inherit the sin of Adam. Well, of course he didn't exist, but so we inherit original sin. Original sin came down in the semen. Jesus was not conceived with semen, that's why he's clear of sin. His mother Mary had to be clear of sin as well, so she had to have an immaculate conception. This is all obvious nonsense. This is all theological bullshit. And the idea that humanity is born in sin and has to be cured of sin by Jesus being crucified, Jesus being punished for all our sins. And that is a morally very unpleasant idea. I'm sure you must agree about that.
I find that Christianity is actually obsessed with love, and that the figure, the teachings of the teaching of Christ, as I see it, and again, I'm a brand new Christian, but what I'm finding out, which is the opposite of growing up as a Muslim, the message of Islam, but the message of Christianity I get is that it's a message of love, it's a message of redemption, and it's a story of renewal and rebirth. And so Jesus dying and rising again, for me, symbolizes that story. And in a small way, I felt like I had died and I was reborn. And that story of redemption and rebirth, I think makes Christianity actually a very, very powerful story for the human condition and human existence, and the pain of suffering, but also our internal, the recognition of what you call sin, but perhaps the character defects, that both good and evil are there, but that both good and evil are in us. I think those teachings in Christianity are far more powerful and have led to, I think, the flourishing of Western civilization, compared to, say, growing up as a Muslim, when I was taught that really the only way for you to be faithful is to fear, naked fear, and to have these sets of obligations which you basically obey. And that was very much about power, it was centered around hellfire and all of these other things. And so Christianity, as I experienced, I'll give you an example. When I was an atheist and I was going all over both the United States and all over Europe, mocking Christians, making fun of them, making fun of faith, as you're doing now, dear Richard. I was walking with 6 to 7 men at any given time, protecting me, armed, from things that I said that were offensive to Muslims, or Muslims thought were offensive to them. Christians were writing me letters saying, you know, we're going to pray for you, you're misguided. And I think that alone defines for me the distinction between Christianity in general, mainstream Christianity, and mainstream Islam.
Richard Dawkins is absolutely right to call the concept of original sin irrational. The entire idea depends on Adam and Eve being real historical people. But they weren't. Genetics proves that humans never came from a single couple. The Human Genome Project and later studies show that our species descended from a population of at least several thousand early humans, not two. The claim that sin is passed through semen, and that Jesus had to be born without it to stay pure, is not just pseudoscientific, it's based on ancient misunderstandings of biology. We now know that moral behavior, empathy, and cooperation evolved through natural selection long before Christianity existed. You don't need sin or supernatural sacrifice to explain human decency. And the crucifixion as a form of cosmic justice? Think about it. An all-powerful God creates a system where he needs to kill his own son to forgive people he made imperfect. That's not justice. That's primitive blood magic. It's the same mindset that drove ancient cultures to sacrifice goats or people to please their gods. In every measurable way, history, science, and ethics, Dawkins's view holds up. Christianity isn't morally superior. It's just better marketed.
Well, I must say, I've never met a vicar that I didn't like. I mean, they're always very, very nice people.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, the stuff they believe is obvious nonsense. And you have to take the whole package, because, I mean, you talked about Jesus rising from the dead. You don't believe Jesus rose from the dead, surely?
I choose to believe that Jesus rose from the dead.
You choose to believe it?
Yes, and that is a matter of choice. And it's a matter, I think it has to go back to, is there something or is there nothing? And I think you start with, there is nothing. And yes, for years I agreed with you, there's nothing. But if you come round to the idea that there might be something much more powerful than we are, something that caused everything else, then something like Jesus rising out of the dead, or these other miracles, Jesus being born out of a virgin, for that higher power is not a big deal. But again, it's a matter of choice, and it is just different planes of perception. And I think here on this plane of perception, having been a former atheist, I don't think this is something we're going to resolve tonight or agree on right now.
Well,
and so that is where I think it's perhaps more interesting, even if you choose not to believe, to say, let's at least talk about the value of Christianity for today. For I look at these universities, the most illustrious universities of the West, and you've all shared with me images of young women draped in kefirs, the symbol of Hamas, performing the Muslim prayer. And tell me if those kids are not morally and utterly lost. And Queers for Palestine. So while you and I and Stephen Pinker and all of those wonderful people were locked up in our ivory towers, let's ask ourselves what was happening on the ground, because in the last 6 decades, we pretty much demonized Christianity and the teachings of Christianity out of the public space, out of school, out of universities. And a vacuum occurred, and that vacuum is now being filled, as G.K. Chesterton said, not because people have come to reason, but because now they'll believe in anything. There are very awful forces today out there that are claiming the hearts and minds and souls of these young students. And when you say there is nothing, you offer them nothing.
We're getting into the bigger political, cultural question. I just feel it's worth pressing one more time on this. What you said, agree to disagree, and I understand, having read Richard's letter to you, that literal belief is the bit that he can't get past. Are you saying that you don't literally believe those things? You talked about planes of reality. Is it that you see a beauty in those things and choose to suspend your rational judgment, or do you literally believe them?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is something subjective, and there's a choice. There are things that you see and perceive that a different person cannot perceive. Art, music. In fact, I think you do enjoy a great deal of Christian art and music. I will look at a painting by Pollock, and I will think my 6-year-old must have spilled all the paint on the canvas and run around. And people are crazy enough to pay millions of dollars and hang it on walls. But I've actually seen people be moved to tears staring at a Pollock. That is a plane of perception that is real, but that's also very, very difficult to measure. And it's the same the way you're moved by certain pieces of music. So the fact that I have faith, and I choose to have faith because of what I've experienced, is just as real for me as it is for the millions of people who believe. But for me, what is even more real is it's the story itself and the wisdom in that story, the morality that has come out, that has evolved out of that story, the internal debates of millennia long and everything that we inherited from it. It's just too casual to cast that aside. And when we've done it, I think we have caused ourselves a great deal of damage.
Richard, having heard that story, that moving story from Ayan of clearly how her conversion has helped her, and also she's explained in beautiful words the mode in which she believes it, do you still say you are not a Christian?
No, not at all. I came here prepared to persuade you, Ayan, you're not a Christian. I think you are a Christian, and I think Christianity is nonsense. You have to be, I mean, you appear to be a theist. You appear to believe in some kind of higher power. Now, I think that the hypothesis of theism is the most exciting scientific hypothesis that you could possibly hold. And the idea that the universe was actually created by a supernatural intelligence is a dramatic, important idea. If it were true, it would completely change everything we know. We'd be living in a totally different universe. Now that's a big thing. I'm sorry, but it's bigger than personal comfort and nice stories and things. The idea that the universe has lurking beneath it an intelligence, a supernatural intelligence that invented the laws of physics, that invented mathematics. And that is a stupendous idea, if it's true. And to me, that simply dwarfs all talk of nobility and morality and comfort and that sort of thing.
So would you have preferred for your erstwhile new atheist colleague, Ayan, not to have converted? Having heard her story, would you rather...
No, I wouldn't say that. I'm just saying that religious belief is bigger than what gives you comfort. Or it's bigger than morality, it's bigger than what gives you comfort, it's bigger than what gives you a bulwark against Islam. It's something huge, it's something terrific, and it's false.
Ayan says belief is a choice, something she feels like music or art. But here's the problem. Truth doesn't work like that. Whether or not Jesus rose from the dead isn't a matter of personal perspective. Either it happened or it didn't. And there's no evidence it did. No Roman records, no contemporary accounts, nothing outside Christian tradition written decades later. Even theologians admit the resurrection isn't provable. It's an article of faith. She also claims Christianity led to the flourishing of Western civilization. But history tells a different story. The scientific revolution happened in spite of the church, not because of it. Galileo was silenced. Bruno was burned. Progress came from reason, not scripture. And when she says removing Christianity created a moral vacuum, that ignores data. Countries like Sweden, Denmark, and Norway are among the least religious. And yet they rank highest in peace, education, and quality of life. You don't need belief in a myth to live ethically.
It is a scientific hypothesis that there is a supernatural creator. And I don't see how you can get to that from feelings of personal comfort or feelings of political necessity. You have to get to that from thinking.
And that brings us to consciousness. So first of all, the hypothesis itself, which even if you don't allow for set religion aside, the hypothesis of where did all this come from and how did it begin, again, there is no consensus on that. There is no consensus on what consciousness is and what all that entails. But I think that it is, on an academic level, very interesting and very rewarding to look into and explore all of these different things separately on an academic level, on a non-academic level. I think that it's very useful now. I hate to go back to utility, but to have all of these things connected, where as human beings, we are material, yes, but we also are more than material. We have a sense of consciousness, and we have a range of needs. And some of these needs, reason can answer, and pure science can answer. But some of these needs cannot be answered by that. And I think faith in a higher power, in God, and in the story that makes sense of it all, gives it meaning, is very, very important for human beings. And the danger lies in trying to conflate these different planes and then casting aside as useful. It is false, it's useful, it's useless, it's unnecessary. And now we have, the range of human suffering, where as an atheist, you don't really offer an answer, you don't offer a prescription for this is a way of life, this is the path to happiness, this is how you can deal with the challenges of existence. And atheism is an attitude. It basically says, as of now, there is no evidence to show that God exists or that a higher power exists, full stop. And you figure the rest of it out. And it's very, very difficult to figure the rest of it out starting from scratch. And I think faith then gives meaning and purpose. And yes, if you're afraid of the dark, and if you're afraid of whatever it is that's causing you anxiety, or whatever is causing you self-doubt, relationships between other human beings, I think Christianity does offer a recipe, and perhaps in my view, the best recipe for not only how to live with yourself and connect to the universe, but also how to connect with fellow human beings and then bring about a civilization like this one.
Suppose it were true that atheism doesn't offer anything. Suppose it doesn't offer anything. So what? Why should it offer anything?
Ayan says faith gives life meaning and comfort. But comfort isn't evidence. And that's exactly Dawkins' point. Just because something makes you feel better doesn't make it true. Christianity claims that a supernatural being created the universe, became human, died, and came back to life. These aren't poetic metaphors, they're concrete claims about reality. And if we care about truth, those claims need evidence. But there is none. No historical proof of the resurrection, no scientific reason to believe consciousness comes from the divine. Just emotional stories repeated over centuries. And saying atheism doesn't offer a way to live misses the point entirely. Atheism isn't supposed to hand you a prepackaged belief system. It's simply the honest position that there's no good evidence for gods. Everything else, morality, meaning, love, purpose, we build together as humans with reason, science, and empathy. In the end, believing something because it feels good is easy. But facing reality without illusions, that's strength.
What I do want to say is this. Faith offers you something, obviously. That's very, very, very clear. But it doesn't make it true. It doesn't make the existence claims of Christianity true. There is a difference from saying that being in a certain psychological place is consoling and comforting and offers you a meaning of life and gives you a purpose in life, all those things which are wonderful. And I have them too. They're a bit different, but I too have a purpose in life, I have a meaning in life. But just simply because something gives you a meaning and a purpose in life, it doesn't make the existential claims true. And Christianity, like any other religion, makes claims about the world, about the universe, which are either true or not true. And
I may be wrong and you may be right. They may be true, but the mere fact that they're comforting doesn't make them true.
So what do you think? Is it better to believe something comforting or to follow what the evidence actually shows?
Why you care about that standard, just like you don't have an objective reason why you care about a God. If there was a God, he should come along and kind of clarify all this. I would think that would be a duty. But the beautiful story that you're talking about, where the most powerful being comes down and becomes a cell, becomes one of the weak, one of the fallen, in order to save them. That's an incredibly nice way to package it, but I have, I guess, a completely different take on it, because the story is a little different. The story starts in Genesis, where God creates everybody, and then it all screws up, and then he tries to fix it, and it screws up, and he tries to fix it, and it screws up. It's this parade, it's this comedy of errors. And then you get to a spot where God, who's been demanding that we slaughter animals and burn them because he likes barbecue, is now decided that he's going to come down and take human form and sacrifice himself to himself for a weekend to fix everything for everybody. That's blood magic. That is sacrificial blood magic thinking, and nothing to do about human value.
Who actually believes that? What you just described as a summary of Christianity. Who actually believes?
How could you not? Did God come down and become human, sacrifice himself?
God the Son became God our brother.
He's still God.
God the Son became God our brother. Right?
But
the Son of
are
the
you
Father.
A non-Trinitarian? Sorry?
That's precisely because I'm Trinitarian. God the Son became God our brother, full of the Holy Spirit, in order to unite us as family back to the same source, back to the Father. This is basic Trinitarian theology.
Did God not sacrifice himself?
The Father sent the Son.
But they're the same.
They're not the same.
They're part of the Trinity.
Yeah, they are definitely.
They are one, right?
They are definitely part of the
Are they one, though?
They are united, absolutely. The Father, Son, and Spirit.
United. I mean, we're united at a table, but we're not one.
The Father is in the Son, and the Son is in the Father, so that they are united on a level that is far superior to ours. But they
why does there need to be a blood sacrifice?
Well, because to walk away from God, to be disconnected from life, means death. Right, and in the Bible, the life is in the blood.
Well, who made that rule?
It's the nature of the case, don't you think? If God is life, if God is a source of life,
couldn't God have done it differently?
Well, if God is the source of life and we reject life, what does that leave us with? Death. If God wants to unite with us in our death, what will he have to take on? Our death.
So you're talking, first of all, you're speaking kind of metaphorically here, because I'm not rejecting life. I'm rejecting a proposition that there's some eternal life because I don't see sufficient evidence for it. If there is, cool. But God, this notion, why does there need to be a blood sacrifice at all? At some point we were running around killing animals and doing it because God loved the smell of burning flesh. Literally, it says that. Now, while it's... I know what part of the objection is. It's like the Easter story when atheists will say, and then the zombies rose up and marched on Jerusalem, and people will be like, there's nothing in the Bible about zombies, but it does talk about the dead getting up out of the graves and going in there. And so it's a colloquialism to refer to it as zombies. I don't think even the atheists, by and large, are thinking that we're talking Walking Dead here, but it's a shorthand to show that there's something that's potentially absurd here, an extraordinary claim that doesn't have evidence for it. This isn't even that. This isn't even an extraordinary claim that doesn't have evidence for it. This is, to me, bizarre. What is it about killing something that God needs you to do in order for God to forgive you? Because if God is the creator of everything, including the rules of how all this works, couldn't he have come up with rules that don't involve killing things?
Matt is right to challenge the idea that morality requires blood. Historically, the concept of sacrifice, especially human or animal, was common in Bronze Age cultures long before Judaism or Christianity. The idea that a God demands blood to fix what he created flawed in the first place isn't moral. It's borrowed mythology, not ethical reasoning. Modern moral philosophy doesn't rely on ancient rituals. In fact, research in evolutionary biology and neuroscience shows that cooperation, empathy, and fairness evolved naturally in human and even primate societies. Frans de Waal's studies on bonobos and chimpanzees show that these animals exhibit moral behaviors like sharing, consolation, and even punishment of unfairness without any concept of religion. Morality comes from being social, not from scripture. Matt also highlights a logical contradiction. If God is all-powerful and all-knowing, why couldn't he create a system where forgiveness doesn't require killing? The idea that the life is in the blood isn't a deep truth. It's a line from Leviticus, tied to Iron Age ideas about purity and atonement. And if Christianity's resurrection story were historical, we'd expect some mention outside the Bible. But no Roman, Greek, or Jewish historians of the time, not even Philo or Josephus, recorded a mass resurrection in Jerusalem. That's a huge red flag for anyone asking for evidence. The truth is, we can be moral, we can build a better world, and we can do it without myth, magic, or sacrifice. Let's continue, and let's hear what Glenn has to say.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, first of all, the priest was many other things, but he was also your butcher, right? You would eat the lamb after you sacrificed it. You would eat the bull. You know, we still go to the butcher. We still sacrifice our animals. And in that sacrifice, even today, in a very secular sense, the death of that animal means our life. In that very literal sense, okay, that animal dies so that we might live. And it's just that in the Old Testament, it was also teaching a spiritual dimension. On top of the barbecues that we all love. You're from Texas, I'm from Australia, we love barbecues, okay?
The vegans are going to hate us.
It was a great conversation with Cosmic Skeptic, by the way. On top of that butchery, there was also a spiritual lesson being taught, and the spiritual lesson being taught was not that the blood of this bull is paying for your sin, but that there is a Messiah who is coming who will pay for your sins. Because no, the blood of goats and bulls cannot pay for sin, but God can take responsibility for his handiwork, and God did take responsibility for his handiwork, and it was his death that actually paid for sin. That's the story.
There's nothing, I'm not saying that secular humanism guarantees a better world. But even if we take what Glenn's saying, even if you were to look at this as Christianity light without the God thing, I would already view that as better because A, we guarantee that we have humans' best interests at heart. That's humanism. It's the foundation of it. You can say, and you would be correct, that it's just a bold, bald assertion that we should care about humans. Okay? I have no response to that. I don't even know why anybody would want to come up with a response. There's nothing that says the world will be better this way, except for this. I did a debate in a Church of Christ where I told them I could write a better book than the Bible and I could prove it to them. Because I could rewrite it word for word, reverse its position on slavery, and it would be a better book. Because for the people who are looking at this, not so much as metaphorical lessons or like that, if they're looking at this as an instruction book for life, that book advocates slavery. That's not even a question. If you were to say, thou shalt not own a human being as property, that would be better than saying you can and that you can pass them on. And so this was the example I used for the people who are kind of like Bible worshipers, not the people who go in looking for, hey, there's an interesting message here, or they're going to tell me something about my life, but no, this is literally word for word, blah, you know. That type of mindset is probably more responsible for the harm and damage that a lot of us would lay at the foot of Christianity than Glenn's version. For sure. I mean, I don't think Glenn's pro-slavery at all. And when you start looking at things where you are finding a way to take a message that could easily be viewed as this is a blood magic sacrifice and say, well, life has to consume life to exist, and you want to kind of maybe blow off why God would have made it that way or why it had to be made that way, which is a weird and interesting theological discussion. Getting rid of those things and keeping the good parts is all I've advocated for ever. And secular humanism, to me, is taking the good parts, whether they're found in Christianity, Judaism, Scientology.
Glenn tries to reframe ancient blood sacrifice as symbolic or meaningful, saying it teaches a spiritual lesson. But that ignores the obvious. It still hinges on the idea that killing something is required for forgiveness. That's not moral. That's Bronze Age thinking. No modern legal or ethical system requires an innocent third party to suffer so someone else can be forgiven. That would be unjust. And saying life consumes life doesn't explain anything about divine justice. It's a biological fact, not a moral one. In nature, predation is about survival, not redemption. To tie that to sin and sacrifice is a category error. Worse, Glenn admits the blood of bulls couldn't pay for sin, so God killed himself to satisfy his own rules. That's not profound. That's convoluted. An all-powerful being wouldn't need a workaround involving torture and execution. Matt's comparison to secular humanism is simple and accurate. It doesn't guarantee a better world, but it gives us tools that actually work. Morality based on well-being is measurable. We can study what reduces suffering and increases flourishing. No divine command needed. And when Matt points out that rewriting just one verse to say don't own people would improve the Bible, he's right. That's not nitpicking. That's moral clarity.
Well, Matt said that he could write a Bible that's superior to the Bible by reversing its position on slavery. I think if you started from scratch without the Bible, though, I don't think you, and I don't think anyone has, written a book or a series of books or a collection of books, a library of books, that has done what the Bible has done for slavery in the world. Because slavery is a human universal, and it has not been overturned by anyone other than those who took the Bible seriously back in the 18th century. They were evangelical Christians, they were Quakers, they were people who took the Bible seriously. So
parts of it seriously.
It's a longer discussion about how you take the Old Testament. But that's got to be interesting, at least, because we can't do a compare and contrast. There's no A/B testing about this. Okay, there's only
which I think kind of undermines what you were just saying. And I sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm in agreement with you. Mm-hmm. You're viewing it as nobody else has done this, and you don't think anybody else could. And my thing is, we have no way to find that out because we live in a world where this is the way things happened. And so to argue that you couldn't actually write a list of moral precepts from scratch that are superior to Christianity.
Well, but then aren't you saying, okay, at least with the Christian side, we've got, there is one group of people that has guaranteed universal equality for all human beings and has ended the slave trade. Okay, it might have taken far longer than you would have wanted it to have taken. But there is one group of people who have done that. We don't know if anyone has or could do that. Let's give it a go anyway. Let's walk away from this thing that has given us all these benefits of the universities and the hospitals and the schools and the scientific method and the emancipation of the slaves and all this sort of stuff. Let's walk away from that. That's quite a leap of faith, don't you think?
And am I also getting the sense, Glenn, that I want to come back to this human at the centre of this, and the fact that Matt says, hey, humans are humans, and it's natural that we're going to prefer ourselves, and that's where the morality comes from, our own best interests. And you're saying, no, somehow Christianity has actually grounded an intrinsic dignity to the human that Matt's godless ethics isn't necessarily going to support. It might go in that direction for a moment, but there's no ultimate foundation to it. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. We are always going to look after ourselves, but who is we and who are ourselves in that conversation? And we are always wanting to narrow the circle around us and our mates and exclude the other tribe and exclude the other kinds of people. So, in the news here in the UK, just recently they brought in a non-invasive prenatal test for Down syndrome. And it had the reliable effect that everybody knew it was going to have. As people knew that they were going to have children with Down syndrome, they aborted them at ever higher rates. And yet the headlines said, children with Down syndrome down 30%. And it sounded like people had found a cure for Down syndrome or something like that. They hadn't found a cure for Down syndrome. They'd just drawn the circle around humanity and kept those with that condition on the outside and wanted to eliminate them. And that, to me, is a very chilling way of proceeding with a kind of a humanism. Because that's always the danger. Who is us? Who are those who we are going to grant with the right to life? And who are those who we are going to say, they do not qualify? And it's always tempting for the humans to say, okay, it's the strong who will make the decision, and it's the weak who must take the hindmost. What is it that's going to stand up for all humans, regardless of capacity, regardless of attributes, regardless of achievements? Who is it who's going to stand up for all humans and actually be true humanists and grant them human rights too?
This is the problem. So first of all, whether or not that abortion scenario that you're talking about is humanism or not is subject for a whole nother debate. But you say, well, nobody could do this. And then when we talk about, here's a list of precepts where we don't include a God in it, then your answer is, now you're just borrowing from Christianity. It's Christianity light, and you've just removed the God. And then the other objection that you're going to launch to secular morality is, what's going to be the foundation beyond this? At least we have a foundation. It's God. Well, what if people don't accept your foundation? That is exactly the same objection that you are leveraging, you're launching at secular humanism. Whatever problems secular humanism may have with regard to foundations of ethics, no religious foundation has any way of solving that. Because ultimately, until some God comes in and says, I am in fact the God of the universe and I am the moral authority, and people are forced to recognize that this is the case, then the only thing that's happening is Glenn's saying God is the foundation of morality and I'm saying humans are. And nobody is going to be, neither of those systems is going to work for people who don't accept that that's a foundation.
Do people have to all recognize this foundation in order for it to be the foundation?
No, and people don't need to recognize that 2 + 2 = 4 for it to be the case that 2 + 2 = 4, and for you to go to your grave proclaiming that 2 + 2 = 4. Even if the whole world said it was otherwise, then 2 + 2 would still equal 4. People don't need to recognize a moral truth to be a moral truth for it to be moral.
They do if you're talking about a moral system. If you want to create, computer code and get people to start programming in it, you've got to be able to convince them about ones and zeros.
Yeah.
So 2 + 2 = 4 isn't even in the same ballpark of there is a God. It's either true or it's not, but it's not a foundation for something. If you're talking about a moral system, the true foundation is agreement on what the foundation is, that the three of us care about human beings. And then we can start arguing about how much we care and where there's going to be conflicts and everything else. But we can't do any of that until we agree on that foundation. And if Glenn's foundation is there's a God at the bottom of this and he can't demonstrate that, then we're not even going to get started on solving the problem.
That's not what 2 + 2 = 4 is the analog of in this conversation. 2 + 2 = 4 is the analog of all human beings are worthy of provision and protection. All of them. Right? Would you agree with that? All members of the human family, no matter what their achievements, no matter what their attributes, all members of the human family are worthy of all provision and protection.
I have no idea.
Mm-hmm. That's a problem. It's definitely a problem, especially when you've got people who are discovering disabled children in the womb.
When I say I have no idea, it's about that simplification. My instinct is, of course, to say yes.
Glenn argues that Christianity offers a unique foundation for universal human dignity, but history doesn't support that. The Bible never clearly condemns slavery, genocide, or misogyny. In fact, it often reinforces them. Yes, some Christians helped end slavery, but they did it by rejecting biblical passages, not following them. And many use the exact same scriptures to defend slavery, segregation, and oppression for centuries. Matt's right to point out that a moral system doesn't need divine command. Morality comes from understanding human needs, preventing harm, and promoting well-being. We know this from decades of research in moral psychology and ethics. Thinkers like Peter Singer, Judith Jarvis Thompson, and John Rawls have laid out secular moral systems built on fairness, empathy, and justice, without invoking gods, blood, or fear. Glenn's example about Down syndrome and abortion is emotionally charged, but it's misleading. Decisions about reproductive health are individual moral dilemmas, not a product of secular ethics trying to erase anyone. Humanism says every person matters because they are a person, not because a holy book says so. That includes people with disabilities, the elderly, and even people with whom we disagree. And Glenn's last move, saying, God is the foundation, whether you believe it or not, misses the point entirely. You can't build a moral system on something unprovable and expect universal agreement. Matt is right. A shared foundation only works if people agree on it. And right now, the only thing we can agree on is this. We're human. We want to suffer less, and we're better off when we treat each other with dignity and care. So here's the question. Do we really need ancient myths to know that kindness, fairness, and freedom matter? Or are we ready to build something better ourselves? If this made you think, Like the video, subscribe for more debates, breakdowns, and evidence-based conversations, and let us know in the comments. What do you think makes a moral life?
There are a lot of people who think that if you took religion away, people would start, rushing around, smashing shop windows and robbing and raping and things like that. No evidence for that whatever. So I despise people whose belief in religion is so firm and so unshakable that they actually think it justifies killing people. And
right. Richard Dawkins, you've talked a lot in terms of religion being a pernicious virus. When you talk in those sort of emotional, quite visceral terms, are you doing that to sort of raise hackles and therefore heighten the debate, do you think?
I don't think I've talked a lot about it being pernicious. I'm not even sure I ever used the word pernicious.
But virus is a word you've
certainly virus. And the point there is really not the pernicious aspect, although I actually think it is pernicious. The point there is that it's infectious. It's something that grips the mind in the same way as a conventional virus, grips the body, in that it takes control, and it does so the better to propagate itself.
But in choosing words like that, or on occasion I've read that you've said you despise organised religion, or religious belief actually, they're very emotive terms for someone from an academic background. Are you doing that because you feel it's in the interests of the cause that you're pursuing, that debate is quite highly charged?
I wonder if they're as emotive as you think they are. I suspect that because we've all been brought up with this sort of culture of respecting religion, that anything comparatively mild sounds more outspoken than it really is. I mean, do you
really despise religious belief?
I despise people who believe something without evidence and then go out and take action which damages other people. Yes. So I despise people whose belief in religion is so firm and so unshakable that they actually think it justifies killing people. And there are, of course, many people like that.
But your average devout worshipper who's sitting in a pew of a Sunday morning, you don't despise them.
No, of course I don't, no.
What are your feelings towards them?
Well, I mean, they're harmless, especially Church of England. I mean, they're harmless. I don't have strong feelings one way or the other. No, of course I don't despise them.
Here's the thing. I am an agnostic. I have thought about the tenets, certainly, of Christian belief. And as far as believing in God is concerned, sort of found them wanting, or myself unable to be convinced. But I still think I can't possibly know whether God exists or not anymore. I mean, am I being sort of, what's the word? Weak-willed, guilty of not having the courage of my convictions?
No, I mean, I'm an agnostic too in that sense. In the God Delusion, I made a 7-point scale. 1 was total conviction that there is a God, and 7 is total conviction that there isn't. And I put myself as a 6. Okay, so that's kind of agnostic, but veering towards atheist. And I would be a 6 with respect to fairies and pixies and werewolves and things like that. But there are people who will say, because they're agnostic, that puts them absolutely right in the middle. The probability of there being a God and there not being a God is exactly 50-50. And that, I think, is the wrong sort of agnostic to be, because I think you can sort of put a probability figure on it. You can say, well, I think a God is very unlikely, but I can't actually disprove it. So I'm not a 7. I'm a 6.5 or something like that. And that's where I would put myself.
Dawkins' idea that religion acts like a virus actually lines up with what psychologists see in child development. Kids are wired to trust authority, which makes them easy to indoctrinate. That's why churches baptize babies or push to Sunday school so early. Once the belief spreads, it's carried forward like an infection of the mind. And he's right to despise beliefs that cause harm. History is packed with examples. The Crusades, the Inquisition, witch trials, all justified by Scripture. Even in the Bible, Luke 19:27 has Jesus saying, "Bring them here and kill them before me." That verse has been used to excuse violence for centuries. The bigger point is about evidence. Dawkins puts himself at a 6 out of 7 on his scale. Almost certain there's no God, but honest enough to say he can't disprove it absolutely. That's science. You follow the probabilities, and the probabilities aren't close to 50-50. There's no evidence of a global flood, no archaeological proof of Israelites wandering the desert for 40 years, and no DNA evidence tying humans back to Adam and Eve. What we do have is overwhelming proof for evolution, the Big Bang, and genetics. And you see the shift today. Pew Research shows Christianity in the US shrinking fast while the number of people with no religion is climbing. The more people learn the facts, the less they rely on faith.
What about the fact that religion, in terms of its institutional influence, persists? How much does that irritate you? Or
it's weird that those countries that have sort of the trappings of theocracy remaining, like Britain, because we have bishops in the House of Lords, and we have lots and lots of faith schools, and we have the Queen is the head of the Church of England. It's an odd thing that those countries, like Britain, like the Scandinavian countries, which have an established church, seem to be the least religious. And a country like America, which has written into its constitution the separation between church and state, a wall of separation, as Jefferson called it, is one of the most religious countries, the most religious country in the Western world. So there's an odd negative correlation with what you might naively expect.
How do you explain that, do you think?
Well, various explanations have been offered. I mean, one explanation is that in a country like Britain, where religion is part of the establishment, it's become sort of boring. Whereas in America, where there's the wall of separation, religion has become free enterprise. And so you have mega churches with their own television stations, their own creches to look after the children, their own gyms. They've become huge commercial enterprises, tax-free, by the way, which helps, with the televangelists having private Lear jets to jet around in and fleets of posh cars and things.
It's not tea and biscuits.
It's a very, very big business, religion in America, whereas in Britain it's become sort of boring and people don't really take it very seriously one way or the other.
Politics is very reluctant to go anywhere near this. I mean, in terms of the solutions to some of what you're talking about, the only place we can look is to politics. The state has to act. Perhaps things have to be legislated for. And yet, I mean, there was a hell of a fuss when Ed Miliband recently said he was an atheist. There's a sort of, it goes back to what you said before, I think, about not offending religious sensibilities.
Yes.
There's a sort of twitchiness about religion.
I think that's
still.
True. Yeah, I think that is
And then
true.
I suppose my question, given the amount of energy you expend on this issue, how you aim to get over that? Because it does stand in the way of society achieving the sort of shape that someone like you would like it to achieve.
Yes, and my colleague Dan Dennett coined the phrase belief in belief. Lots and lots of people are not religious themselves, but they've got a vague idea it's a good thing that other people are. It's very patronising and condescending, by the way. It's sort of the attitude, well, you and I, of course, are too intelligent to be religious, but the common people need it. And there are a lot of people who actually think that. A lot of people think that we need religion in order to be moral. There are a lot of people who think that if you took religion away, people would start, rushing around, smashing shop windows and robbing and raping and things like that. No evidence for that whatever. I mean, absolutely none. So I think one important thing we've got to do is to prize apart religion from morality. It's absolute nonsense to say that you need religion in order to be moral. And so I think that would be one major step we could take. You don't need to send your child to a faith school in order to instill in that child a sense of morality, a sense of good citizenship.
For whatever reason, even in a secular country like this, we have arrived at a point where there's a sort of latent belief within the popular consciousness that to be scientific is to somehow be sort of desiccated and dry and to miss out on the magic and mystery of one's experiences and the world and so on. You dispute that, right?
So not only dispute it, I mean, it's just the exact opposite of the truth. Science is wonderful. Science is amazing. The fact that you could understand why you exist, who could not be turned on, who could not be excited by that, who would ever want to live in a world where you live your life, you go to work, you go to the office, whatever it is, you go to the football match, and this goes on year after year, and then you die. And you don't have any understanding of why you were there in the first place. That's desiccated, that's dry. What is not dry and desiccated is coming into the world, as it were, awakening in the world, and awakening in the fullest sense of seeing the universe, seeing the stars, seeing down a microscope, seeing what's inside every single cell, seeing what's inside the brain, and marveling at this wonderful gift of life that we have, albeit temporarily, marveling at this gift of understanding why we exist and rejoicing in it for as long as we do exist.
Richard Dawkins, thank you very much.
Thank you.
What Dawkins highlights here is fascinating. Countries like Britain still have official churches, bishops in government, even a monarch as head of the Church of England. Yet they're among the least religious places in the world. Meanwhile, America, which is supposed to separate church and state, has become one of the most religious nations in the West. The difference is simple. In Britain, faith feels like old furniture. In the US, it's a booming business. Megachurches run TV networks, gyms, schools, and do it tax-free while pastors fly in private jets. That's not spirituality, that's enterprise. And Dawkins is right. People still cling to the idea that without religion, society would collapse into chaos. But the data proves the opposite. Secular countries like Sweden, Denmark, and Japan have some of the lowest crime rates and highest levels of social trust. Meanwhile, the US, with all its churches, struggles with mass shootings and inequality. The Bible itself doesn't give us a higher moral ground either. It condones slavery in Ephesians 6:5, and in Numbers 31, Moses commands his followers to kill men, but keep virgin girls as spoils of war. That's not morality, that's barbarism.
I tried to put a case for why we feel altruism, and because of once living in these small villages. And so
yeah, it didn't quite work for me though. Again, Richard, you're taking a particularly impressive and somewhat puzzling aspect of human behavior, radical altruism, the sort of Oskar Schindler who risks his life and ultimately loses it for people he doesn't even know, and saying, well, it's just a misfiring. It doesn't set well with one's sense as a human of how to admire that.
But okay, misfiring doesn't have to have the pejorative connotation that you've put on it. I mean, you could say that the desire to adopt a child. I mean, many people adopt a child. Now that is a misfiring, but that's not as pejorative. I mean, it's an admirable thing to do. It's a wonderful thing to do, but it is a misfiring of the Darwinian impulse to want to rear a child of your own. And that's fine. It's a beautiful thing.
Then why do we admire it?
Well, we have the desire to rear to rear a child for good Darwinian reasons, which you and I would agree with. But then, when a couple cannot have a child, they have that desire. It's like the desire for sex, which you still have the desire even though you're using a contraception. Similarly, you still have the desire for a child, even though you are, for one reason or another, unable to have a child of your own, so you adopt one. Now that is technically a misfiring, but please don't think that I'm saying anything that pejorative about it. On the contrary, I think it's noble, as I think the sort of Oskar Schindler behavior is extremely noble.
But presumably you believe that the nobility we see in such an act goes beyond just an evolutionary thing. You believe that there's a real right and wrong that exists in the universe that we're kind of seeing and acting upon in that sense.
I do see that, and I am not happy dismissing it on purely materialistic grounds. Well, those who study sort of what's exceptional about humanity, they always come up with these three characteristics of what it is that we are attached to. One is truth, which at the moment is a little bit underneath fire, at least in my country. Another is goodness. Where does that come from? And the third is beauty, which we touched on, and which I also think can't be dismissed as we're just peahens. We see beauty in equations. We see beauty in music and in a patch of pink in the western sky at sunset, and it doesn't seem to have a whole lot of evolutionary benefit to us, and yet it matters, and it also lifts us in a certain way into a plane of something other than the sort of pure dailiness of our experience, some glimpse of something what Lewis calls joy, where you have just this sense that there's something more, if I could just grasp it, and then as soon as you try, it's gone. And that feels to me like a real significant experience that should not be dismissed as a neurotransmitter that just lost its way.
You keep using words like dismiss. I mean, I don't dismiss it. I exult in it. I mean, it's wonderful. It's beautiful. And the fact that you can give it an explanation is not to dismiss it or demean it or reduce it in some way.
Yes, I mean, a sense of beauty, the sense of the enjoyment of Beethoven, it is actually firing of synapses in your brain, but that's not to demean it. It's still wonderful.
And incredibly wonderful. And it's not, Polkinghorne's line comes to mind that beauty is not something we should dismiss as just evolutionary, epiphenomenal froth on the surface of an uncaring universe.
But that's an emotive language again. It's not dismissing, it's not froth, it's wonderful, but it's explicable.
Here, Dawkins continues to explain why we don't need religion to be moral, even in his debate with Francis Collins. Collins points to radical altruism, like Oskar Schindler risking his life for strangers, and suggests that must come from something beyond evolution. But Dawkins shows how these actions fit perfectly within an evolutionary framework. Our instincts for kinship and empathy sometimes misfire outside their original purpose, leading us to adopt children, save strangers, or act selflessly. That doesn't make it less noble. It makes it even more beautiful that morality can grow from natural impulses, not divine command. And history backs this up. Non-religious countries like Sweden and Denmark consistently score among the highest on global measures of generosity, social trust, and human rights, with some of the lowest crime rates in the world. Meanwhile, Scripture often falls short. In Exodus 21, the Bible regulates slavery instead of condemning it. Yet people today recognize slavery as wrong because of human empathy and reason, not because religion told them. Even when it comes to beauty and music, Dawkins is right. Knowing that Beethoven's symphonies move us because of neurons firing in our brains doesn't make the experience less profound. Science explains the how, but the wonder remains. You don't need God to feel awe. In fact, understanding the natural explanation makes it richer. What do you think? Does morality come from religion or from our shared humanity? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe.